Thank you to the Religions for Peace Australia for creating this space tonight. I also want to acknowledge the reflections already shared this evening by my fellow panelists. Listening tonight, I'm reminded again that although our traditions are different, many of the concerns we carry are deeply shared. And the longing for peace, the desire for belonging, the struggle against fear and hatred, and the hope that humanity can still find a way forward together. As I reflected on tonight's theme, I found myself drawn back into my own story. I often describe myself as a colourful mess, not because life has been chaotic for the sake of it, but because no single identity fully explains who I am. I was born in Tonga, but I spent the first 10 years of my life growing up in Arnhem Land among Yolngu people, and then later moved to suburban Sydney, where for the first time I became aware of what it meant to be different. As a teenager, I returned to Tonga searching for identity, only to discover there too that I sat somewhere between worlds. Over time, I came to realize that within me were all these stories, places, cultures, and relationships together, none fully cancelling out the other. And perhaps because of that journey, I have become cautious of simple categories. Human beings are more complex than the labels we place upon one another. And yet, increasingly, ours is a world that pushes us towards simplification. Us and them. What's safe and unsafe, or belonging and not belonging, of what's worthy or unworthy. And we see it in public discourse. We see it online. We see it in racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and fear. We see it whenever human beings become categories rather than neighbours. And beneath much of this, I think many people are simply tired of outrage, tired of hostilities, tired of feeling unsafe, tired of carrying grief and uncertainty. As a Christian minister, I often return to the gospel story of the disciples caught in the storm. And what strikes me about that is that peace does not come because the storm was ignored. Peace emerges within the storm itself. That feels important to me tonight, because we are living through storms, wars, violence, division, economic uncertainty, social fragmentation, even climate fears, and the erosion of trust between communities. And the temptation during storms is either to retreat from one another or to harden ourselves against one another. But perhaps the deeper call of this moment is to remain human towards one another, even within the storm. One of the deepest gifts from my Pacific heritage is a proverb, Piki piki hama, kai vai vai manava. It comes from the experience of our ancestors navigating the ocean. When storms struck and one canoe was damaged or running out of provisions, another canoe would draw alongside it. They would lash the boats together, piki piki hama, and then share whatever remained, vai vai manava. What moves me about that proverb is this: they did not wait for calm seas before binding themselves together. They bound themselves together during the storm. And perhaps that is one of the lessons our fractured world most needs again. Not communities drifting further apart, but communities willing to draw alongside one another. Not pretending differences does not exist, but recognizing that our humanity is bound together. For me as a Christian, this is where faith becomes deeply important, because Christianity does not begin by denying suffering. The cross tells the truth about violence, hatred, fear, and human brokenness. But the resurrection tells us those things do not ultimately have the final word. One of the things I value deeply in Christian faith is that it gives us language for lament, not despair, not avoidance, but the courage to face suffering truthfully while still holding on to hope. And perhaps that is part of the role faith communities can still play today. Not to inflame fear, not to deepen division, but to help communities remain human. To remind people that dignity matters, compassion matters, truth matters, mercy matters, neighborhoods matter. Earlier in life, I worked as a motor mechanic for many years before entering ministry. And one of the things that the trade taught me was that there is rarely one tool that fixes everything. And perhaps human communities are similar. There are no one quick fixes for fear, no simple repair for fractured trust, no easy path through grief, conflict, or division. And healing is usually slower than we want. Reconciliation is slower than we want. And peace, real peace, asks something of us. It asks whether we are still willing to listen, still willing to remain present to one another, still willing to protect human dignity, even when disagreements remain. For me, that is where faith still matters deeply. Not as a way of escaping the world, but as a way of remaining grounded within it. A way of resisting hatred. A way of refusing despair. A way of remembering that another person is never merely just an argument or a category or even enemy. And perhaps that is part of the invitation before us tonight. How do we remain human toward one another in a time that so often pulls us apart? How do we hold conviction without losing compassion? How do we build communities where difference does not automatically become division? I do not think those are easy questions, but I do think they are necessary ones. And perhaps, like those canoes drawing alongside one another during the storm, our future may depend less on winning against one another and more on whether we are still willing to bind ourselves together carefully enough that all may continue forward. Thank you.